The village of Waterhaven was a place where time seemed to seep away, leaving behind a residue of whispers and shadows. It clung to the edge of a vast, brooding moor, a place where the wind howled like a wounded beast and the rain fell with a relentless, mournful rhythm. Verona Carter, a woman with a mind as sharp as a scalpel, was an outsider in this world of ancient customs and unspoken fears. She had come to Waterhaven not out of choice, but duty. A string of inexplicable drownings had gripped the village, their waters claiming lives with an eerie indifference. As an anthropologist, Verona was accustomed to the fringe, the places where logic often foundered. But there was something about Waterhaven that chilled her to the bone, something that went beyond mere academic interest. The villagers were a tight-knit community, their faces etched with lines of hardship and a peculiar kind of resignation. They spoke in hushed tones of the water which, a malevolent spirit, said to lure the unwary to their watery graves. Verona had scoffed at such tales initially, dismissing them as the remnants of a superstitious age. But as she delved deeper into the community's history, the lines between myth and reality began to blur. There were old, forgotten songs, sung in haunting melodies, that spoke of the water's dark heart. There were tales of children disappearing without a trace, their laughter replaced by the mournful cry of the moor. And there was an unsettling undercurrent of fear that seemed to seep into everything, like the sinister spread of mold. Verona found herself drawn to the water, despite the growing unease. It was a strange compulsion, a magnetic pull that defied reason. As she stood at the edge of the murky pond, watching the ripples distort the world around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and evil was stirring beneath the surface. The water was black and still, reflecting the desolate sky like a tarnished mirror. A cold mist clung to the surface, blurring the edges of reality. Verona shivered, not from the cold but from a deeper, more primal fear. There was something insidious about this place, a malevolent presence that seemed to seep into her skin. Old Mrs. Thornhill, the village's unofficial historian, had warned her about the pond. "It's not just water, dearie," she'd said, her eyes holding a depth of knowledge that frightened Verona. "It's a mouth, open and hungry." The old woman had reached out to touch Verona's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Stay away from it, child." Verona had dismissed the warning then, but now, standing on the brink of the unknown, she was less certain. A sudden ripple disturbed the water's surface, sending shivers down her spine. A shape moved beneath, a dark, amorphous form that twisted and writhed. Her heart pounded in her ears. Was it imagination, or was something truly monstrous lurking in the depths? A cold wind swept across the moor, carrying with it the sorrowful cries of unseen creatures. Verona felt a strange pull towards the water, as if an invisible force was drawing her in. She resisted, but the urge was overwhelming. It was as if a part of her wanted to be consumed by the darkness, to become one with the water which... A twig snapped behind her. She whirled around, her breath catching in her throat. No one was there, just the endless expanse of the moor. But she knew she was not alone. Something was watching her, something ancient and evil. As darkness began to encroach, Verona found herself drawn closer to the water's edge. The pull was irresistible, a siren song that promised oblivion. With a heavy heart, she stepped forward, into the cold embrace of the unknown. The water rippled around her ankles, then her calves, and she felt a strange sensation, as if the pond was alive, welcoming her back to its cold, wet womb. The world around her grew hazy, and she thought she saw faces in the water, twisted and contorted with silent screams. They reached out to her, their spectral hands clawing at the surface, begging for salvation. Her rational mind screamed at her to retreat, but her body felt weightless, buoyed by the call of the water which... Her feet sank into the soft, sucking mud, and she stumbled, the water rising to her waist. Panic set in, a desperate fight or flight response that her logical mind could not quell. The faces grew more insistent, their eyes locking onto hers with a hunger that was palpable. Verona's throat tightened, a scream building within her. Suddenly, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, and she was yanked backward. The world spun as she was dragged away from the water's edge, the cold, dead eyes of the drowned fading into the murky depths. Gasping for air, She looked into the concerned eyes of a young villager, Theo. His grip was firm, his eyes filled with a terror that mirrored her own. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice urgent. "The water which doesn't like to be watched." Verona stumbled away from the pond, her heart racing. Theo's words sent a shiver down her spine. Was she truly in the grip of a malevolent spirit, or was it her own mind playing tricks on her? The night grew colder, the mist thickening into a tangible shroud that obscured the village. The cottage lights twinkled in the distance, beckoning her back to the safety of civilization. But she knew she couldn't ignore the pull of the water witch any longer. Her research had become an obsession, a descent into madness that she could feel herself spiraling into. The following days saw Verona delving deeper into the village's archives, searching for any mention of the water witch. The villagers watched her with a mix of fear and pity, whispering about the outsider who'd come to dance with the devil. Her dreams grew more vivid, filled with images of the drowned reaching out to her, their eyes pleading for help. One evening, as the rain pattered against her window, she stumbled upon a tattered, water-stained journal. It spoke of a time when the water witch had been banished, trapped in the depths of the moor. But the seal had weakened, and the creature had begun to claim souls once more. The final entry was written in a frenzied scrawl, the ink smeared with what looked like tears. "The water calls," it read. "The water always calls." Verona felt a chill run through her. The words resonated with a truth she could no longer deny. The water was indeed calling, and it was time to answer. With trembling hands, she packed her bag and prepared to confront the horror that lay beneath the surface. The moon was a silver sliver in the night sky as she approached the pond, her heart racing with every step. The water lapped at the shore, a gentle, almost soothing sound that belied the darkness beneath. She took a deep breath and stepped into the icy embrace of the water, feeling the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. The faces grew clearer now, closer. They reached for her, their desperation palpable. Verona waded deeper, the water rising to her neck, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the moon's reflection danced. And then she saw it, a shadowy figure rising from the depths. The water witch, her eyes gleaming with malicious intent. The villagers' whispers had been true. The spirit was real, and it had its sights set on her. Verona's mind raced as she fought the urge to succumb to the water's embrace. But she was not a believer, she was a scientist, and she would not become a victim to a mere myth. With a roar of defiance, she turned and began to wade back to shore, her determination pushing against the invisible force that pulled her deeper. Theo's voice echoed in her thoughts. The water which doesn't like to be watched. Could there be truth in the villagers' fears? Or was it the isolation playing tricks on her, magnifying her own fears into something more sinister? The shadowy figure grew larger, the whispers of the drowned more insistent. The water around her churned, as if alive with the spirits of the lost. The witch's eyes locked onto hers, a cold, hollow promise of eternal torment. Verona's legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to keep moving, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. As she reached the shore, her feet slipped on the slick, algae-covered stones. She fell hard, the wind knocked from her lungs. The water which was almost upon her, the chill of her presence like a vice around her throat. But instead of fear, Verona felt anger. Anger at being manipulated, at being drawn into this nightmare. With a surge of strength, she pushed herself to her feet and stumbled away from the water's edge. The witch's form receded, the whispers fading into the night. Verona stood there, trembling, as the rain pattered down on her, cleansing her of the encounter. The following days saw Verona interviewing the villagers with a newfound urgency. The water which was not just a story, it was a very real terror that held them in its grip. And she was determined to break the cycle of fear and death that had consumed Waterhaven for generations. Through her interviews, she discovered that the water which had a weakness, a time when her power waned. It was a small window of opportunity, but it was all she had. Verona knew that she had to act fast, before the whispers grew too loud and the water claimed another victim. The night of the new moon approached, the air thick with anticipation. The villagers huddled in their homes, the candles flickering a stark contrast to the inky blackness outside. Verona prepared herself for what was to come, her skepticism replaced with a grim resolve. Armed with the knowledge of ancient rites and rituals, she approached the pond, the water's edge shimmering under the moon's feeble light. The whispers grew to a crescendo, the water witch's rage palpable. But Verona was ready. As the witch rose from the depths, Verona began to chant, her voice cutting through the night like a knife. The water churned, the witch's eyes burning with fury. But the words held power, the incantation pushing back the darkness. For a moment, the world held its breath. And then, with a final, desperate shriek, the water witch was gone, her form dissipating into the night. The pond stilled, the whispers silenced. Verona felt a weight lift from her, the oppressive atmosphere giving way to a sense of peace that washed over the village like a gentle wave. In the aftermath, Verona found herself the unlikely hero of Waterhaven. The villagers, once wary, now looked to her with hope. But she knew the battle was not over. The water witch would return, and she had to ensure that the village was ready, that the cycle of fear would be broken for good. Her research had turned into a quest for knowledge, not just of the water witch, but of the human psyche and its capacity for both fear and resilience. And as she stood by the pond, the moon casting its silver glow across the calm surface, she realized that the true horror was not in the folklore, but in the darkness within the human heart. Verona approached the village elder, Mr. Jenkins, whose eyes held the weight of centuries of dread. He listened as she recounted her findings, the weakness of the water witch, and the hope that the cycle could be broken. His expression was a tapestry of doubt and hope, but he nodded solemnly. "We must prepare," he said, his voice like gravel. Together, they gathered the villagers, sharing the knowledge that had been buried beneath layers of superstition and fear. They explained the significance of the new moon, the time when the water witch's power was weakest. The villagers, though skeptical, were desperate for a glimmer of hope in the relentless tide of tragedy. The days leading up to the new moon were a flurry of activity. They cleaned the village, lighting bonfires to ward off the malevolent spirit. They painted protective symbols on their doors and windows, and whispered ancient incantations under their breath. Verona worked tirelessly alongside them, her skepticism replaced with a fierce determination to save this community from the clutches of the water witch. The night of the new moon arrived, the air electric with anticipation. The villagers gathered around the pond, torches in hand, their faces a mix of fear and hope. Verona stood before them, the water's edge a stark reminder of the battle ahead. She began to chant, her voice clear and strong, the words resonating through the night like a clarion call. The water rippled, then churned as the water witch emerged, her form twisted and terrifying. The villagers gasped, but they held firm, their eyes on Verona. The chant grew louder, the power of their collective belief giving her strength. The witch's eyes searched the crowd, her rage palpable. But the villagers stood united, their fear now transformed into a wall of defiance. The chant grew to a crescendo, and the water witch's form began to waver. With a final, desperate howl, she sank back into the depths, the water calming once more. The villagers erupted into cheers, their relief and joy a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had dominated their lives for so long. In the following weeks, Verona documented the changes in Waterhaven. The drownings ceased, and the villagers slowly began to reclaim their lives from the shadow of the water witch. The pond, once a symbol of dread, now held the promise of new beginnings. The whispers of the drowned had been silenced, and the village was reborn. As she prepared to leave, her heart heavy with the weight of her experience, Theo approached her. "You've done more than save us," he said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You've given us back our home." Verona looked out over the moor, the moon a bright beacon in the sky. She knew the water which would return, that this was but a temporary reprieve. But she also knew that the villagers of Waterhaven had found their voice, and that was a power even the darkest of spirits could not overcome. With a nod to Theo, she packed her things and set off into the night, her mind already racing with thoughts of the next chapter in her study of the human condition. For now, though, she had given the people of Waterhaven a chance to breathe free. And as she disappeared into the mist, the whispers of the moor grew fainter, replaced by the gentle whisper of the wind through the willow trees, a lullaby of peace and protection. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing to stay updated with our latest stories, give us a like if you want to see more, and drop a comment below to let us know your thoughts.